Welcome to I'm a Millionaire, So Now What? The advice podcast for self-made millionaires and wealthy families. Each week, we deliver the critical insights and strategies you need to manage your money, your business, and your life. Here's your host, wealth management expert, Colleen O'Connell Campbell.
Hi and welcome, Colleen O'Connell Campbell here, your host of I'm a Millionaire, So Now What? Welcome back to the show. So glad you could join me today. And listen, what I wanted to do today was expand on last week's episode. Last week, of course, I invited Susan Diaz, the CEO founder of C+B Digital, and essentially my outsourced chief marketing officer. Yeah, I know. I also am part of RBC and we have great access to resources. But for this podcast, I like to work with a personal group who understand what I'm trying to achieve. And so Susan invited me to consider a reverse interview. And that's what we did if you were listening to the show. The whole idea was to give you a bit of background into how I come up with the themes for my elevated conversations. You know, the virtual roundtables that I host for business owner entrepreneurs to gather with like-minded individuals, and we pick a theme. We have about a 90-minute conversation around that particular theme. And I like it to be fun because, life is too short not to have fun, right? So coming up at the end of the month on April the 29th, I am hosting another session, Elevated Conversations, the Queen's Gambit. So we talked about, of course, how that came to be, watching the show, reading the book. And I wanted to, over the next few weeks, expand on some of those topics. And this week in particular, I think what I'd like to do is expand on the strategy versus tactics point. So when you're playing chess, you need to look at the whole board and have a sense of the strategy you want to take. And I had mentioned that the best chess players out there, they know the strategy that they plan. They plan it out well in advance. And the players know by the move of the first white move what the overall strategy is. Now, the tactics are also important, but here's the thing. Strategy without tactics, to me, is but a dream. And tactics without strategy reminds me of that Cheshire Cat quote. That Cheshire Cat quote that I've quoted quite a few times here on the show, and maybe you're familiar with it. It goes something like this. If you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. So if you don't know what your strategy is, any number of tactics will get a result, but is it the result that you're looking for? And so this is one of the things that I'm hoping we might be able to talk about at the Elevated Conversations. The difference between strategy, having that broader vision. So for me, that strategy and broader vision is all about what can I do to double the number of self-made millionaires in Canada? What can I do to help CEO founder entrepreneurs have cash-rich exits? Cash-rich exits that result in them being part of the self-made nation and self-made millionaires. So that's the big strategy, right? And the tactics. Well, this podcast is one of those tactics. How else can I get my message out? Well, I get on the air once a week and share some conversation with you. Well, it's not really a conversation, is it? It's pretty much me talking at you. And actually, that's a little bit about what the Elevated Conversations are. So that's also part of the tactics. That's an opportunity for me to gather with 6 to 8 of you, members of the Self-Made Nation, CEO, founder, entrepreneurs, for us to gather in a space, a safe place, and have these high-level conversations. And, if you think about it, who is it that you turn to when you need advice? Perhaps when you need to get out of the tactical mindset and the having to take, well, like in this COVID period of time, having to react, and rather than be reactive, instead be proactive. Gathering with your peers, sharing what's happening, getting ideas, building your network. Those are all things that I know you want to do on a regular basis. There's also some stats out there. I've started to go down this path of getting a certification in something called Value Builders. You're going to hear more about it over the course of the next while here on the podcast. And I'm sure it's going to drive some of my elevated conversations. But statistically, Self-Made Nation, CEO founder entrepreneurs, this is what you're doing. You're turning to your peers for support, for advice. You're turning to your peers even before you're turning to accountants, lawyers, wealth advisors like myself. And in fact, I kind of think of myself as one of you, as one of us, but also I'm definitely in the advice and professional services business. So I get that. I get that you want to turn to each other. And so Elevated Conversations is about giving you that space to get together with your peers. Tactics versus strategy, strategy versus tactics. That's our next session coming up on April the 29th, 11 a.m. So I think the only thing that I really want you to take away from this short podcast today is that if you have a strategy and you haven't laid out your tactics, you're just dreaming. You're probably dreaming in Technicolor rainbows, unicorns. If you're pounding the pavement and hustling and taking things task by task and reacting, you're going to get results. But are they really what you were driving towards? What I'd really like you to take away is taking the time to really think about what it is your purpose, what is your why, what is the strategy, what tactics, what might you be able to learn from gathering with your peers? If you watch The Queen's Gambit and you observe chess, and maybe you are a chess master yourself, and so perhaps what I'm talking about here with strategy and tactics makes complete sense to you, or maybe I'm off the wall. But this is what I noticed, and this is how I relate it to business, for sure. And then, the other thing with strategy and tactics is that certainly there are best practices. Certainly there are tactics that have worked really well for you probably in the past. Maybe there are tactics that have worked really well in your industry. But just as we've seen, the world can change. And if we have to pivot, I know, quote unquote pivot, there's that word again. It's so important to be able to combine the academia, maybe the best practices of the industry, with a gut or visceral reaction. And I can remember one of the guests here on the podcast, Victoria Sopik, and her one of her key messages, takeaways. One of her key messages was stop second guessing yourself and go with your intuition. I wish I could do that more often. I think some of us have a gut, visceral, intuitive knowing, and yet we want to back that up with research. And others of us, it doesn't come so naturally. We really want the research. So I'm not saying there's a right or wrong, because who am I to say? But I think there is a point where you can't necessarily, follow the dots, follow the, precise, scaling up version or profit first version or business school Venn diagram. Strategy and tactics is also about being able to pivot on the fly, grasp an opportunity when you feel it right in your gut, or in your heart for that matter. So if you're interested in gathering with 6 to 8 of your peers and kind of digging into this topic a little bit, then I invite you to reach out to me. You can find me on LinkedIn, direct message me, or on LinkedIn. That's the best place. Of course, email works too. Colleen, you can find me at colleen.campbell@rbc.com. Okay, that's it for today. Short and sweet, strategy versus tactics, and how that relates to the Queen's Gambit and the game of chess. Thanks for being here. I hope you'll join me again next week as we bring more content to you. More interviews are coming up soon. I'm in the process of re-engaging with a number of guests, so you'll hear from them soon. We're here every Tuesday. Thank you so much for joining me. I so appreciate you. I'm Colleen O'Connell Campbell, Wealth Advisor at RBC Dominion Securities, and your host. TTFN. Ta-ta for now.
Thanks for listening to I'm a Millionaire. So now what? If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe and leave a review on iTunes. To contact Colleen O'Connell Campbell and for more strategies on building, saving, and investing your wealth, head on over to ColleenO'ConnellCampbell.com or Facebook O'Connell Campbell Wealth Management at RBC Dominion Securities, Inc. I'm a Millionaire. So now what? Is brought to you by O'Connell Campbell Wealth Management at RBC Dominion Securities. Building and strategizing financial plans that optimize how entrepreneurs, self-made millionaires, and wealthy families spend, save, and share their wealth. All opinions expressed by the host, Colleen O'Connell Campbell, and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinions of RBC Dominion Securities. This podcast is for information purposes only. Before taking any action based on information in this podcast, you should consult with a qualified professional. Colleen O'Connell Campbell is a wealth advisor with RBC Dominion Securities, a member of the Canadian Investor Protection Fund.